The screech of metal on asphalt was the first sound I heard that Tuesday morning, followed immediately by aggressive pounding on my front door at 6:30 in the morning. I stumbled out of bed, still groggy from a late night finishing up paperwork for my snow removal business, and found myself face to face with Brenda Hutchins, the HOA president of Pinecrest Estates, flanked by two police officers looking equally annoyed at being called out this early. "Zachary Vance, I'm calling the police on you for operating unlicensed commercial equipment in a residential zone," Brenda announced before I could even get a word in, her perfectly styled blonde hair not moving an inch despite the bitter January wind whipping through Boulder, Colorado. I blinked at her, then at the officers. "You already called them. They're right there." One of the officers, a tired-looking guy with gray at his temples, sighed. "Mr. Vance, do you have the proper licensing for operating snow removal equipment?" "Yeah, hold on." I left the door open and went to grab my wallet from the kitchen counter, pulling out my commercial snow removal license, my CDL, and for good measure, my county contractor permit. When I returned, I handed them to the officer while Brenda tapped her foot impatiently on my porch. The officer examined them carefully, then looked at Brenda. "Madam, everything appears to be in order." "That's impossible. You can't just operate heavy machinery in a residential neighborhood. Check his permits for this specific area." I know for a fact that Pinecrest Estates has restrictions on commercial vehicles. The second officer, younger with a shaved head, spoke up. "Madam, he's allowed to keep his work vehicle at his residence as long as it's properly registered and insured." "Which it is," I added, finally finding my voice. "My truck and plow are parked in my driveway on my property. What exactly is the problem here?" Brenda's face was turning an interesting shade of red. "The problem is that you've been using that monstrosity to clear your driveway at ungodly hours, disturbing the entire neighborhood with the noise. Furthermore, you've been clearing other people's driveways without HOA approval." I cleared Mrs. Patterson's driveway because she's 83 years old and had a hip replacement 2 months ago, and the Johnsons because they both work night shifts at the hospital and asked me to help them out. I didn't charge them anything. That's not the point. Any modifications to the visual appearance of properties, including snow removal patterns that differ from the standard neighborhood aesthetic, must be approved by the HOA board. I stared at her. "Snow removal patterns? Are you serious right now?" The gray-haired officer cleared his throat. "Madam, unless there's an actual violation of city ordinance, we can't do anything here. The gentleman has all his licensing in order." Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. Then I'm issuing an official HOA citation for unauthorized commercial activity and disturbance of neighborhood peace. Zachary, you'll be receiving a formal letter and a fine of $500. "You can't fine me for helping my neighbors," I protested. "Actually, according to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Pinecrest Estates HOA bylaws, which you agreed to when you purchased your home, I absolutely can." She pulled out her phone and began tapping at the screen. "You'll have the letter by end of business today. Officers, thank you for your time, even if you weren't helpful." She turned on her heel and marched back to her white Lexus SUV, leaving me standing in my doorway in sweatpants and a T-shirt in 20-degree weather. The gray-haired officer handed me back my licenses. "Sorry about that, Mr. Vance. We get calls from her at least once a week about something or other. You might want to review your HOA bylaws, though, just to cover your bases." After they left, I stood in my kitchen making coffee and fuming. I'd bought my house in Pinecrest Estates 3 years ago, right after starting my snow removal business, Vance Snow Services. The neighborhood was nice enough, full of upper-middle-class families and retirees, with well-maintained homes and manicured lawns. I'd read through the HOA bylaws when I purchased the place, but they'd seemed standard enough. No boats or RVs parked in driveways, maintain your lawn, no external modifications without approval, that sort of thing. Nothing about snow removal patterns, whatever the hell that meant. I pulled out my laptop and searched through my email until I found the PDF of the HOA bylaws. Scrolling through the 47 pages of dense legal text, I finally found Section 7, Paragraph 3. It stated that residents could not operate commercial businesses from their residence that would create increased traffic, noise disturbance, or visual disruption to the neighborhood character. That was vague enough to be problematic, but I had a good argument. I wasn't operating my business from my house. I had an office address registered with the city in the commercial district downtown. I just parked my truck at home, like thousands of other people who drove work vehicles. The letter from Brenda arrived at 4 p.m. via certified mail. Along with the $500 fine, it included a cease and desist order preventing me from using my snow removal equipment within Pinecrest Estates boundaries, including my own driveway. I was given 14 days to appeal the decision before the fine increased to $1,000. I called my lawyer, Dennis Morrison, who I'd used when setting up my business. He listened to the situation and chuckled dryly. "Zach, HOAs are their own special kind of legal nightmare. Technically, they can enforce their bylaws as long as they don't violate local, state, or federal law. The question is whether their interpretation of the bylaw is reasonable. So what do I do? File an appeal. Show up to the next HOA board meeting and make your case. Bring documentation showing your business is registered elsewhere, that you're not actually operating from your residence. Also, document the fact that you've only been helping neighbors for free, not conducting business." "What are my chances?" He paused. "Against a reasonable HOA board, pretty good. Against someone like this Brenda person you described, could go either way. The problem is these boards have a lot of discretion in interpreting their own rules." I thanked him and hung up, then immediately started drafting my appeal. I gathered my business registration showing my downtown office address, my licensing documentation, and wrote out statements about the help I'd provided to my neighbors. I also included a log of the times I'd used my equipment at home, showing that I'd never started before 7 a.m. on weekdays or 8 a.m. on weekends, which was within the city's noise ordinance allowances. The next day, I hand-delivered my appeal to Brenda's house. She answered the door in a tennis outfit, looking irritated at the interruption. "This is my formal appeal of your citation and fine," I said, handing her the envelope. She took it without looking at it. "The next board meeting is in 3 weeks. You'll be notified of the time." 3 weeks. The letter says I have 14 days before the fine increases. The fine increases if you continue to operate your equipment in violation of the cease and desist. As long as you comply, it will remain at $500 until the board hears your appeal. "So you're saying I can't even clear my own driveway for 3 weeks, correct? You'll need to make alternative arrangements. I suggest hiring a proper HOA-approved service." She started to close the door. "Wait, who's HOA-approved? Mountain Peak Snow Services." "I'll email you their contact information." The door shut in my face. Back home, I looked up Mountain Peak Snow Services. They had a decent website and seemed legitimate enough. But when I called to get a quote just for clearing my driveway, they quoted me $300 for the season, which would mean paying them for snow that had already fallen plus whatever came in the next few months. Then something occurred to me. I called back and asked to speak to the owner. "This is Craig speaking. How can I help you?" "Hi Craig, I'm Zach Vance. I run Vance Snow Services. I'm actually calling about commercial permits for snow removal in Boulder County. I'm updating my records and wanted to verify which companies are licensed for different areas." "Sure. What do you need to know? Are you guys licensed for private road maintenance in residential developments, private roads?" "No, we only do driveways, parking lots, and public streets when we subcontract with the city. Private roads require a special permit through the county because of insurance and liability issues." My heart started beating faster. "Really? I didn't know that." "Yeah, it's a pain. You have to carry extra insurance and get inspected every year. There's only a few companies in the county that have it because most developments don't have private roads." After I hung up, I pulled up the county website and searched for information on private roads. It took some digging, but I found what I was looking for. Private roads that served more than 5 residences required a special maintenance permit, and the county had to approve any contractor who worked on them. This included snow removal. Pinecrest Estates had private roads. The development had been built 15 years ago, and part of the appeal was that the roads were privately maintained by the HOA, not city streets. It meant they could control speed limits, parking, and access. I searched the county's contractor database. Only 4 companies in Boulder County had the private road maintenance permit. Vance Snow Services was one of them. I'd gotten it 2 years ago when I landed a contract with a large shopping center that had private access roads. Mountain Peak Snow Services was not on the list. I started laughing, right there in my kitchen, because the implications were suddenly very clear. If Pinecrest Estates wanted their roads plowed, they needed someone with that permit. The HOA contracted out their snow removal, I knew that much. I'd seen the trucks come through after major snowfalls with Silverline Contractors written on the side. I looked them up in the database. Not licensed for private road maintenance. Over the next few days, I did more research. I pulled the HOA's financial records, which as a homeowner I had a right to access, and found their contract with Silverline Contractors. They'd been using them for 3 years, paying them $45,000 annually for snow removal services on the development's private roads. Every single plow job they'd done was technically illegal. The county could fine the HOA up to $10,000 per violation, and the contractor could lose their general business license. I had copies of everything, sitting in a folder on my desk, and I wondered what to do with it. Part of me wanted to just turn it over to the county and watch Brenda scramble to deal with the fallout. But another part of me, the part that actually had to live in this neighborhood, knew that nuclear options usually created more problems than they solved. The next major snowstorm hit 8 days after Brenda's visit. 16 inches fell overnight, and by morning, the entire development was buried. I watched from my window as residents tried to dig out their driveways. Mrs. Patterson's house remained completely snowed in. The Johnsons' driveway was impassable. My truck sat in my garage, and my fingers itched to fire it up and help. But I'd been served with a cease and desist, and I wasn't going to give Brenda any more ammunition. Around 10 a.m., I saw the Silverline trucks roll through, plowing the main roads through the development. They did a sloppy job, leaving huge berms at the end of everyone's driveways and missing the cul-de-sacs entirely. By noon, my phone was ringing with calls from neighbors asking if I could help them out. "I can't," I explained to each one. "The HOA issued a cease and desist. I'm not allowed to operate my equipment in the development until they hear my appeal." Mrs. Patterson called me in tears. "Zachary, I can't get out. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow for my hip. No one can even get to my house to help me shovel. Mrs. Patterson, let me make some calls. I'll figure something out. I called Dennis again. If I help someone in a medical emergency situation, can the HOA actually do anything to me? Emergency necessity is a defense, but it's risky. They could argue it wasn't really an emergency. Do you want my honest advice? Yeah, help her. Make sure you document everything. Get her doctor's appointment confirmation. Take photos. Keep records of your attempts to find alternative help. If they fine you for it, we'll fight it, and frankly, no reasonable court would uphold a penalty for helping an elderly person in a medical emergency. I grabbed my keys. 20 minutes later, I had Mrs. Patterson's driveway cleared and a path shoveled to her front door. She insisted on paying me, but I refused. I did, however, make sure to get a written statement from her about the situation and a copy of her appointment confirmation. I'd just gotten back home when Brenda's Lexus pulled up in front of Mrs. Patterson's house. I watched as she got out, took photos of the cleared driveway, then marched over to my house. I opened the door before she could knock. I know why you're here. You violated the cease and desist order. Mrs. Patterson has a medical appointment tomorrow morning. She's recovering from surgery. No one else could help her, and your precious Silverline contractors left her completely snowed in. What exactly did you expect me to do? Follow the rules. That's what I expect everyone in this community to do. Rules exist for a reason, Zachary. Once people start thinking they can just ignore them whenever it's convenient, the entire system falls apart. Even when following the rules could actually harm someone. There are proper channels for emergencies. She should have called the management company. They have a list of approved contractors who could have helped her. You mean Mountain Peak, who wanted to charge $300 just to do my driveway for the season. How much would they have charged her for emergency service? Brenda's expression didn't change. That's not my concern. You're receiving an additional fine of $750 for violating the cease and desist order. The total amount due is now $1,250, payable within 7 days. I'll be fighting this. I expect nothing less from you. The board meeting is scheduled for next Wednesday at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. You'll have 15 minutes to present your appeal. She walked back to her car without another word. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Zachary Vance? This is Gregory Hartwell. I live over on Maple Court in Pinecrest. I heard about what happened with you and the HOA, and I think you should know that a bunch of us are pretty unhappy about the situation. What do you mean? Brenda's been causing problems for a lot of people lately. Last month, she fined the Kowalskis $500 because their Christmas lights were the wrong shade of white. She's been sending violation notices to anyone whose trash cans are visible from the street for more than 12 hours. People are getting sick of it, but nobody wants to be the one to stand up to her because she controls the board. She can't control the board by herself, can she? Isn't there a vote? Technically, yes. But the other board members are her friends, Karen Whitmore, Susan Chen, and David Foster. They go along with whatever she wants. Elections are coming up in 6 months, and a lot of us are planning to run for positions, but that doesn't help you now. I appreciate you calling, Gregory. Listen, I'm coming to that board meeting next Wednesday, and I'm bringing people with me. You've been a good neighbor to a lot of folks here. It's time someone reminded Brenda that she works for us, not the other way around. Wednesday arrived with clear skies and temperatures in the teens. I dressed in my best suit, printed out my documentation, and prepared for what I expected to be a hostile room. When I arrived at the clubhouse at 6:45, I was shocked to find the parking lot completely full. Inside, the meeting room was packed. Every chair was occupied and people lined the walls. I recognized probably 40 or 50 of my neighbors. Mrs. Patterson was there, supported by her daughter. The Johnsons stood in the corner. Gregory Hartwell waved at me from the third row. Brenda sat at the front table with the 3 other board members, and her face had gone pale at the turnout. She banged a gavel on the table with more force than necessary. "This meeting will come to order. I want to remind everyone that only board members and the appellant may speak during an appeal hearing unless recognized by the chair." "Point of order," called out Gregory. HOA Bylaws Section 12, Paragraph 7 states that any homeowner may speak during the open comment period of any board meeting. Brenda's jaw tightened. "The open comment period comes after we've heard the appeal." "Actually," said a woman I didn't recognize from the front row, standing up with a copy of the bylaws in her hand, "it says the open comment period comes at the end of the meeting, not after a specific agenda item. And it says that any agenda item involving penalties or fines against a homeowner must allow relevant testimony from other affected parties." "Who are you?" Brenda demanded. "Patricia Thornton, 452 Willow Street. I'm an attorney, and I've spent the last 3 days reviewing our HOA bylaws because I'm preparing for the board elections in 6 months. I suggest we follow them correctly." Brenda looked at the other board members, who all seemed to be trying to disappear into their chairs. Finally, she said, "Fine. We'll allow relevant testimony. Zachary Vance, you may present your appeal." I stood and walked to the front, setting my folder on the podium that had been set up. "Thank you. I'm appealing 2 fines levied against me by the HOA. The first, for $500, claims I violated Section 7, Paragraph 3 by operating a commercial business from my residence. The second, for $750, claims I violated a cease and desist order. I'd like to address both." I pulled out my business registration. "First, I don't operate my business from my residence. As you can see from this documentation, Vance Snow Services is registered with a commercial address downtown. I have an office there where I conduct all my business operations. I simply park my work vehicle at my home, which is legal under city ordinance as long as the vehicle is properly registered and insured, which it is." "You've been conducting snow removal within the development," Brenda interrupted. "I've helped exactly 2 neighbors for free. Neither time was I conducting business. I wasn't paid, I didn't advertise, and I didn't treat it as a commercial transaction. If helping your neighbors is now banned by this HOA, I think everyone here deserves to know that." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. As for the second fine, I helped Mrs. Patterson after a major snowstorm left her completely snowed in the day before a medical appointment related to her recent hip surgery. I did so after attempting to find alternative assistance and finding none available or affordable. I have documentation of all of this, including a statement from Mrs. Patterson herself. Mrs. Patterson's daughter stood up. "My mother is 83 years old and recovering from major surgery. Mr. Vance was the only person who helped her when she needed it. Fining him for that is unconscionable. He violated a direct order from this board." Brenda's voice was rising. "An unreasonable order," Patricia Thornton said, standing again. "May I approach?" Brenda waved her forward irritably. Patricia walked to the board table and laid out several pieces of paper. "I've researched case law on HOA enforcement in Colorado. There's substantial precedent that HOAs cannot enforce their bylaws in ways that create safety hazards or prevent emergency assistance. Threatening to fine a homeowner for helping an elderly neighbor in a medical emergency situation would likely be considered unreasonable restraint." "This wasn't an emergency," Brenda insisted. I have my surgery records, Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice shaky but determined. I can show you why I needed that appointment. That's not necessary, Mrs. Patterson, I said quickly. I turned back to Brenda. But I do have a question for the board. Can you tell me about the HOA's contract with Silverline Contractors? Brenda blinked. What does that have to do with anything? Well, part of your argument against me is that I should have used an HOA-approved contractor. I'm curious about how contractors get approved. What's the process? The board reviews contractors and approves those who meet our standards for quality and reliability. What about licensing requirements? She shifted in her chair. Of course we verify they are properly licensed. Great. So you verified that Silverline Contractors has a private road maintenance permit from Boulder County. The room went very quiet. David Foster, one of the other board members, leaned over to whisper something to Brenda. She shook her head at him. All contractors are required to maintain appropriate licensing, she said carefully. That's not what I asked. I asked specifically about the private road maintenance permit, because Pinecrest Estates has private roads, not public streets. And under Boulder County Code Section 15.3.8, any contractor performing maintenance on private roads serving more than 5 residences must carry a special permit. I have that permit. Does Silverline Contractors? I pulled out my documentation and walked it to the board table. This is the county's list of contractors currently licensed for private road maintenance. You'll notice Silverline isn't on it. Neither is Mountain Peak Snow Services, who you recommended I hire. Brenda snatched the papers from my hand. Her face went white as she read through them. How long has Silverline been plowing our roads? Someone called out from the audience. 3 years, I answered, turning to face the crowd. According to the HOA's financial records, which I reviewed as is my right as a homeowner, they've been paid $45,000 annually. Every single time they've plowed these roads, they've been operating without the proper permit. The penalty for that is up to $10,000 per violation, assessed against both the contractor and the entity that hired them. The room erupted. People were shouting questions. Several were on their phones, and the board members were huddled together in a frantic, whispered conversation. Gregory Hartwell stood up, and his voice cut through the noise. I move that we table this appeal until the board can verify the licensing status of all HOA contracted service providers, and that all fines against Zachary Vance be suspended pending the outcome of that review. I second that motion, Patricia Thornton called out. That's not how this works, Brenda tried to say, but she was drowned out by calls of support for the motion. Actually, Patricia said, walking back to the front with her copy of the bylaws, any homeowner can make a motion at a board meeting, and if it's seconded by another homeowner and receives majority support from the homeowners present, the board is required to hold a vote. That's Section 12, Paragraph 11. I count approximately 60 homeowners in this room. Shall we have a show of hands? Virtually every hand in the room went up. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but Karen Whitmore, one of the other board members, put a hand on her arm. Brenda, I think we should accept the motion. This is ridiculous. You're all letting him manipulate you. He's just trying to get out of legitimate fines by creating a distraction. How is pointing out that the HOA has been using an illegally licensed contractor for 3 years a distraction? Someone shouted. The board needs to investigate this, David Foster said, speaking up for the first time. If what Mr. Vance is saying is true, we could be facing significant liability. I vote to accept the motion. Karen Whitmore nodded. I agree. Susan Chen, who hadn't said a word all evening, quietly raised her hand in agreement. Brenda was outvoted. She banged the gavel so hard I thought she might break it. "Fine. The appeal is tabled and the fines are suspended pending review. This meeting is adjourned." She gathered her papers and stormed out, leaving the other board members scrambling to follow her. The room burst into conversation as soon as she was gone. Gregory came up and shook my hand. "That was well played. I just want to be able to plow my own driveway without getting fined." "It's bigger than that now," Patricia Thornton said, joining us. "If the county investigates this, the HOA could be facing serious financial penalties. As a lawyer, I have to advise that everyone in this room might want to start paying attention to what our board has been doing with our money." Over the next week, things moved fast. I filed a formal complaint with Boulder County about Silverline contractors operating without proper licensing. The county opened an investigation, which automatically triggered an audit of Pinecrest Estates HOA since they were the contracting party. Brenda tried to get ahead of it by immediately terminating the contract with Silverline and hiring a properly licensed company, but the damage was done. The county found that Silverline had performed snow removal operations 43 times over 3 years without the proper permit. The fines totaled $430,000, split between Silverline and the HOA. The HOA's portion was $215,000, which represented nearly 2 years of collected HOA fees. The development didn't have that kind of money in reserves. An emergency homeowners meeting was called. The clubhouse was even more packed than before, and the mood was ugly. People were shouting before the meeting even started. Brenda stood at the front table, her usual confidence completely gone. "The board is exploring options for addressing this financial shortfall. We may need to implement a special assessment to cover the fines." "How much per household?" someone demanded. Karen Whitmore answered, her voice barely audible over the angry murmurs. "Approximately $3,000 per home." The room exploded. People were on their feet, yelling. Several were demanding the board's resignation. "This is your fault, Brenda," a man near the front shouted. "You're so busy harassing people over Christmas lights and snow removal that you couldn't be bothered to verify basic licensing on a major contract. The board shares collective responsibility," Brenda tried to say, but she was drowned out. Patricia Thornton stood up. "I move for a vote of no confidence in the current board and immediate elections to replace all positions." The motion was seconded instantly. Despite Brenda's attempts to shut down the meeting, the vote was called. It was unanimous except for 4 votes, which I assumed were the board members themselves and maybe their spouses. The county investigation continued, though. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a Boulder County Sheriff's detective named Laura Simmons. "Mr. Vance, I'm investigating the situation with Silverline Contractors and Pinecrest Estates HOA. I understand you're the one who initially reported the licensing violation." "That's right. I need to ask you some questions. Would you be available to come down to the station?" I met with Detective Simmons the next afternoon. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who took detailed notes as I explained everything that had happened. "So you discovered the licensing issue while researching your own appeal?" she asked. "Exactly. I was trying to understand what licensing requirements existed for snow removal in the development, and that's when I found out about the private road permit." "Did you know about this permit requirement before you filed your complaint?" "No. I got my permit 2 years ago when I landed a contract with a shopping center. I didn't realize Pinecrest's roads counted as private roads until all this started." She nodded and made a note. "Here's the thing, Mr. Vance. The licensing violation is serious, but it's a regulatory issue, not criminal. However, during our investigation, we found something else. It appears that Brenda Hutchins, the HOA president, has a personal relationship with the owner of Silverline Contractors. Her son-in-law owns the company. I sat up straighter. What? She never disclosed this to the board or the homeowners. She pushed through the contract 3 years ago, and Silverline has been receiving $45,000 annually since then. Under Colorado law, that's a conflict of interest. Given the amount of money involved and the deliberate concealment, we're looking at potential fraud and embezzlement charges. Holy shit! There's more. We've been going through the HOA's financial records as part of the audit. There are a number of questionable expenses that were approved solely by Mrs. Hutchins without board votes. Landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, repairs that all went to companies that were finding connections to her family members. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 5 years. I thought about all the fines she'd been handing out, all the violations she'd been so eager to enforce. She was running the HOA like her personal piggy bank. It looks that way. We're building a case, but it takes time. I wanted to let you know because you're likely to be called as a witness when this goes to trial. 3 days later, Brenda Hutchins was arrested at her home on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The news made the local paper, and suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing with reporters wanting comments. I kept my statements simple and factual. I explained what had happened with my fine and appeal, how I discovered the licensing issue, and that the rest had been uncovered by law enforcement. I didn't gloat, even though part of me wanted to. The interim HOA board, led by Patricia Thornton, who had been elected temporary president, met with me privately a week after Brenda's arrest. "Zachary, we owe you an apology," Patricia said. The other new board members, including Gregory Hartwell, nodded in agreement. "The previous board's actions were inappropriate and caused you significant stress and expense. I appreciate that. We're also in a difficult position financially. The special assessment is going to be necessary to cover the county fines, but we're working with a lawyer to potentially recover some of the money through legal action against Brenda Hutchins and her family members who benefited from the fraud. I understand. There's one other thing. We need to hire a new snow removal contractor, someone who's properly licensed. Your company is on the approved list. Would you be willing to submit a bid?" I thought about it. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Pinecrest Estates ever again. But another part of me recognized that this was actually a good opportunity, and the new board seemed genuinely interested in doing things right. "I'll submit a bid," I said. "But I want it understood that if I get the contract, it's purely business. No special treatment because I live here, and no conflicts of interest. Everything transparent and by the book." "That's exactly what we want," Patricia assured me. I submitted my bid at $38,000 annually, $7,000 less than what Silverline had been charging. The board accepted it unanimously. The contract was signed with every I dotted and every T crossed, with full disclosure to all homeowners and monthly financial reports required. The first major snow of the season under my contract came in mid-February. I was out at 4 a.m. with my crew, making sure every road in Pinecrest Estates was cleared before people had to leave for work. We did the main roads first, then the side streets, then the cul-de-sacs that Silverline had always skipped. By 7 a.m., the development was completely clear. My phone started getting texts from neighbors thanking me. Mrs. Patterson called to tell me what a wonderful job we'd done. The Johnsons sent me a gift card to a local coffee shop. The special assessment hit every household the next month. $3,000 was a lot of money, and I felt it just like everyone else. But there was a general sense in the community that we were fixing something that had been broken for a long time. The full extent of Brenda's financial manipulation was still being uncovered, with forensic accountants finding questionable expenses going back nearly 7 years. The civil suits started piling up. The HOA sued Brenda and her family members to recover the misappropriated funds. Individual homeowners filed a class action lawsuit. Silverline contractors went bankrupt trying to pay their portion of the county fines. I was deposed 3 times over the next few months as the criminal case against Brenda moved forward. Each time, I told the same story, walking through exactly what had happened from that first morning when she'd shown up with the police to the board meeting where everything had unraveled. The trial started in June. I attended when I could, sitting in the back of the courtroom and watching as prosecutors laid out a detailed case of fraud and embezzlement. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, email communications, testimony from board members who'd been steamrolled by Brenda's aggressive management style. Her defense was that she'd been trying to maintain the community's standards, and that any financial irregularities were the result of poor record-keeping, not intentional fraud. The jury didn't buy it. She was convicted on 14 counts of fraud and embezzlement. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution, which would likely take the rest of her life given that she and her husband had to sell their house and most of their assets to begin covering what she owed. Through all of this, I kept running my business and fulfilling my contract with the HOA. Spring came, and I shifted to lawn care services for some of my clients. Summer meant pressure washing and parking lot maintenance. By the time fall rolled around, Vance Snow Services was doing better than ever. The publicity from the case had actually brought in new business, with other HOAs and property managers reaching out specifically because of my reputation for proper licensing and ethical business practices. The first anniversary of that morning when Brenda had shown up with the police came and went. The new HOA board was functioning smoothly, with active participation from homeowners and complete financial transparency. They'd recovered about 40% of the stolen money through the civil suits, which helped offset some of the special assessment costs. I was in my garage doing maintenance on my snow plow equipment when Gregory Hartwell stopped by. It was late October, and the first snow of the season was forecast for the following week. "Hey, Zach, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "The board wanted me to ask if you'd be interested in renewing your contract for another year. Same terms, same price if that works for you." "Yeah, I'd be happy to renew." "Good. Also, some of us were talking and we think you should consider running for the board in the next election. You've got a good head on your shoulders, you care about the community, and you've got a spine. That's a rare combination around here." I laughed. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm not sure I'm board material. I'm pretty busy with the business. Think about it. No pressure, but the offer's there." After he left, I stood in my garage thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. It had started with a petty dispute over helping my neighbors, and had uncovered systemic corruption that had been bleeding the community dry for years. I'd nearly been fined over $1,000 for doing the right thing, and instead, I'd ended up with a solid contract and a community that actually functioned the way it was supposed to. The criminal justice system had worked, slowly and methodically, exactly the way it was designed to. Brenda was in prison. The money, or at least some of it, was being recovered. The regulatory agencies had done their job in uncovering the licensing violations, and the community had stepped up to hold their leadership accountable. The first snow came that next week, right on schedule. I was out at 3 a.m., watching the heavy flakes fall through my headlights as I guided my plow truck through the dark streets of Pinecrest Estates. The roads were empty except for me, and there was something peaceful about being out there in the quiet, doing work that mattered. By the time the sun came up, every road was clear. I drove past Mrs. Patterson's house and saw lights on in her kitchen. The Johnsons' cars were already gone, both of them headed to their shifts at the hospital on roads that were safe to travel. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Thornton. "Roads look great. Thanks for everything you do." I smiled and headed back home. My driveway was still covered in snow, the last one I'd get to today. I angled the plow and cleared it in 3 smooth passes, then parked my truck in the garage. Inside, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the winter wonderland that Boulder always became this time of year. My laptop was open to my email, and I saw a new message from the HOA board with the contract renewal paperwork attached. I thought about Gregory's suggestion that I run for the board. Maybe not this cycle, but perhaps eventually. There was something to be said for being involved in your community, for making sure things were done right. But for now, I was content being the guy with the properly licensed snow plow, the one who cleared the roads and helped his neighbors and ran an honest business. It wasn't glamorous, but it was good work. Another text came in, this one from a property manager I'd worked with before. They had a new shopping center that needed snow removal services and had heard good things about my company. Would I be interested in bidding on the contract? I texted back that I would send over a proposal by end of day. Outside, kids were starting to emerge from houses, bundled up in winter coats and ready to play in the fresh snow. A snowman was taking shape in the yard across the street. Life in Pinecrest Estates continued, healthier and more honest than it had been in years. I finished my coffee, opened up my laptop and started working on that proposal. There was snow to plow, roads to clear, and a business to run. And somewhere in a Colorado state prison, Brenda Hutchins was learning that rules and regulations applied to everyone, including the people who thought they were in charge. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd called the cops on me for operating snow removal equipment, trying to enforce rules she didn't fully understand. In the end, her lack of understanding about what rules actually mattered had brought down everything she'd tried to build. I thought about that morning almost a year ago, standing in my doorway in sweatpants while she threatened me with fines and police action. If someone had told me then how it would all turn out, I never would have believed them. But sometimes life surprises you. Sometimes standing up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient and difficult, actually works out. Sometimes the system functions the way it's supposed to. And sometimes the person who tries to use rules as weapons finds out that those rules can cut both ways. The snow kept falling outside, soft and white and clean. I had work to do, contracts to manage, and a community that was finally on solid ground. Whatever came next, I'd handle it the same way I'd handled everything else, with proper licensing, honest work, and a refusal to back down when I knew I was in the right. My phone rang. It was Dennis, my lawyer. "Hey, Zach, just wanted to give you a heads up. The restitution hearing for Brenda Hutchins is next week. They're going to be determining exactly how much she owes and to whom. You might get some money back from all of this." How much are we talking about? Hard to say. There were a lot of victims. But you're definitely on the list for the legal fees you incurred defending yourself against her bogus fines, plus the time and expense of dealing with all of this. Could be a few $1,000s. I'll take what I can get, but honestly, having a functioning HOA board again is worth more than any restitution check. Dennis laughed. That's a healthy attitude, spoken like someone who's moved on. After we hung up, I realized he was right. I had moved on. The anger and frustration I'd felt during those first few weeks had faded, replaced by something more productive. I'd learned a lot about HOA law, about community organizing, about standing up for yourself without burning bridges you might need later. The spring elections came around, and the new board was confirmed permanently by the homeowners. Patricia Thornton remained as president, with Gregory Hartwell as vice president. They ran the HOA with transparency and common sense, focusing on actual community needs rather than petty violations. The landscaping looked better. The clubhouse pool was properly maintained. The roads were cleared promptly after every snow. Trash can violations stopped being a thing. People decorated their houses for holidays without fear of fines over the wrong shade of lights. Pinecrest Estates became the kind of community it should have been all along. A nice place where people looked out for each other, where the rules made sense and were applied fairly, where leadership actually served the residents instead of the other way around. My business continued to grow. I hired 2 more employees and bought a second truck. The contract with Pinecrest Estates remained my anchor client, but I diversified enough that I wasn't dependent on any single source of income. I'd learned that lesson well. Mrs. Patterson made a full recovery from her hip surgery. She insisted on baking me cookies every Christmas, more than I could possibly eat, so I started bringing them to HOA board meetings to share. The Johnsons had their first baby, a daughter they named Emma. When they brought her home from the hospital, there was already a path cleared to their front door, courtesy of a neighbor with a snow blower who'd taken up the tradition of helping out. The restitution hearing resulted in me getting back $3,200, which covered my legal fees and then some. I deposited the check and then took Mrs. Patterson out to dinner to celebrate. She'd been the catalyst for everything, whether she knew it or not. If I hadn't helped her that snowy morning, I might have just paid the fine and moved on, and Brenda's corruption might have continued for years. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the thing that changes everything. As winter turned to spring and spring to summer, life in Pinecrest Estates found a comfortable rhythm. The special assessment was paid off over time. The community recovered financially. New families moved in, and they got the benefit of a functional HOA without having to live through the dysfunction that came before. I never did run for the board. I thought about it, but ultimately decided I could serve the community better by doing what I did best, maintaining the infrastructure and being a reliable neighbor. Not everyone needs to be in leadership. Some people just need to be dependable, but I stayed involved. I attended board meetings. I voted in elections. I made sure my voice was heard when decisions needed input. And I kept my licensing up to date, my insurance current, my equipment properly maintained. Because at the end of the day, that was what the whole thing had been about. Doing things the right way, following the actual rules that mattered, and refusing to let someone abuse power just because they happened to hold a position of authority. Brenda Hutchins had called the cops on my snow removal equipment, thinking she could intimidate me into compliance with her arbitrary interpretation of HOA bylaws. Instead, she'd picked a fight with the one person in the development who had the licensing she didn't even know was required, who had the patience to research the actual rules, and who had the spine to stand up when it mattered. The cops had come, examined my licenses, and found everything in order. Brenda had tried to fine me anyway, and in doing so, she'd set in motion the investigation that would ultimately expose her corruption and land her in prison. There was probably a lesson in there about karma or justice or the dangers of petty tyranny. But mostly, I just thought about it as a reminder that details matter. Licensing matters. Following actual rules instead of made-up ones matters. And sometimes, the person who looks like they're causing problems is actually the only one paying attention to what the problems really are. Years from now, when I'm old and telling stories about my business, this will be the one I tell. Not because I'm proud of taking down a corrupt HOA president, though I suppose there's some satisfaction in that, but because it represents everything I believe about running a business and being part of a community. Do honest work, treat people fairly, know your responsibilities, and stand up when something isn't right. My truck sits in my garage now, clean and maintained and ready for the next snow. The plow blade is sharp, the engine is tuned, and all my permits and licenses are properly displayed in the cab. I'm ready for whatever comes next, whether it's another snowstorm, another unreasonable HOA demand, or just another day of doing the work that needs to be done. Because in the end, that's what this job is about. The snow falls, the roads need clearing, and someone has to do it right. I'm licensed for that. I'm trained for it. I'm ready for it. And if anyone wants to call the cops about it, they're welcome to try. My paperwork is in order.